They Hunger remains a classic horror mod for Half-Life 1. It's my personal favorite, especially the first 2 episodes of it. But today, we'll be reviewing They Hunger Episode 3, the finale. While Episode 1 was more horror and Episode 2 introduced some action into the mix, Episode 3 tends to go all out. While it has some high points, it does have some low points that make it less stellar than the first 2. They Hunger Episode 3 was released in 2001 and it was developed by Black Widow Games, a small team of developers who specialized in making Quake and Half-Life mods in the 90s. I played this mod around 2003 or 2004 when I bought a bootleg Half-Life CD, and this mod was already on it. I never fully got to finish it till I streamed it a while ago, but anyway, before I talk about the gameplay, let's have Lamwarp, a fellow YouTuber and my basement prisoner, talk about the story.
Now remember how the story in part 1 and 2 are relatively simple? We'll throw all that simplicity away because the story in part 3 can almost be a whole movie itself. If you recall, at the end of part 2 you start a fire that spreads to an oil tank and goes kaboom. So now in part 3 you get a little dream type sequence where you're seeing zombies. You get woken up by a nurse, but you fall back asleep and dream again about that one-night thing from the Half-Life beta. Once you truly wake up, you're in a hospital. And can you take a wild guess as to what's in this hospital? Zombies, of course. You grab a gun and get out that hospital. You go through the sewers and you make it out to a forest kind of place. You keep going while meeting the same enemies from part 2. Along the way, you go through a small farm with these damn chickens. You keep walking for what feels like 20 minutes, seeing some beat up houses and what looks to be like Stonehenge? Odd. You go through a pipe just to end up back at the prison where the oil tank blew up. You go back through it until you get to the train yard that it has. You go in some box to get some ammo, only to get locked up like a fool by the sheriff. You get transported by those bulls back to Stonehenge to see the sheriff and some zombies do some cult stuff. I don't know what they're doing. Good news though, they get interrupted by the army coming in, but the army wants to kill you as well, so you don't get a break. You now go back the way you came from, but instead go to this other train yard. You go in one of the train carts, only to get trapped again as the train goes, lol. When the train stops, you get out and realize you're back at the prison. Again. You do meet another sheriff though, who is actually friendly this time. All he needs you to do is go a long ways back to turn on the flight control system for a helicopter that this place apparently has. So while you're doing that, through the window you see the sheriff and the doctor talking again. The doctor though didn't make it out of the prison when you blew it up, and turns out to be some big cyborg thing now, like what the fuck. He catches you peeking though, so sounds the alarm. Just in time though, because you find the thing you were supposed to turn on, and the good sheriff starts up the helicopter. The doctor doesn't want you to escape though, so you have to fight him, while you can barely aim at him because you're in a helicopter. You kill him though, and you and the sheriff fly away into the night and safely escape. Or do you? No, of course you don't. You get targeted by some parachute people, and the bad sheriff who has his own helicopter. Now it's just one big fight in the air as he slowly chips away at your helicopter. Good news though, you take him down first, and you fly away into the night. Like actually this time. There you have it, the story of They Hunger. Very different from part 1 and 2. Part 3 seems to be more action than horror, which I don't mind, but then again this was at first a horror mod.
Piggybacking off of what Lamb said, Episode 3 is definitely more action than horror. While it not might be a bad thing on its own, Episode 1 and 2, especially 1, puts up this standard of horror that unfortunately Episode 3 fails to match. While there is definitely a lot of horror and gruesome moments in the mod, like hearing a literal baby get eaten by a zombie nurse, or seeing people burnt alive in the fire chamber, it feels these moments are far and few in between for them to make a proper impact. One of the best moments in the mod is when you keep hearing a strange animal noise while walking through the forest. Later on, you see a skull of a bull on the ground. Then you pass through this bullpen in the village. It all sets up for a surprise that is very well pulled off when a goddamn bull charges at you out of nowhere. The first time I saw this thing, I was terrified. Its appearance and its grisly sounding audio made me very jumpy. One of the other aspects I liked was when we go to the Mad Doctor's house, but this time it's all burnt down. It was nice to see a previous location, but in a different state. But this leads me to another problem the mod has. You see, 1/3 of the way through, the mod starts to backtrack a lot. You go in reverse of the new locations you already went through in this mod, then it throws in these old locations from the previous episode. While I like the new locations, there's a certain lack of them that makes the locales feel uninteresting or repetitive. If we talk about the combat encounters, while most of them are fun and interesting, there's a few sections that are either unbalanced or just irritating to go through. Since most of the hallways don't have any cover, if you come face to face with the military soldiers or zombie soldiers, they drain half your life away before you can take them down. Also, did you see what I did there? Half your life? No? Okay. The Stonehenge fight gets weird because on my screen in 1080p, I could barely see the skeletons in front of the forest and the ground textures, but I'll chalk that up to my bad eyesight. But the worst sin the mod does are the final boss fights. When you reach the end of the mod, it does give you plenty of supplies to fight the Mad Doctor. If you don't have the perfect aim, the Doctor's beehive weapon will keep draining your health while you try to balance yourself on the shaky helicopter and take you down. While this fight isn't too difficult, the fight right after this with the sheriff is totally bonkers. In my playthrough, I was only left with 7 health and barely any ammo. I had no choice but to go into God mode and do this part because the incoming soldiers on the parachutes are very difficult to kill, and then the sheriff's helicopter has an insane amount of health. If you're lacking in either health or ammo after the Mad Doctor fight, it's impossible to go through this without cheating. What I did like was the inclusion of new enemies though, the chicken, the bull, the tiny skeletons, and the military. Fighting them was enjoyable and killing a zombie chicken was hilarious. Now let's talk about the audio side of things in the mod.
Almost all the audio in this mod is just about the same as it was in part 1 and 2. The only other background sounds are only triggered at certain times. The most notable one is the baby you can hear crying at the very beginning. Most of the sounds are just regular Half-Life sounds, and most of the non-Half-Life sounds are already sounds used in part 2. There are custom voice lines for the characters again, like the sheriff.
With this place, take them away, boys.
But there are some new ones, like for this nurse in the very beginning.
Wake up, you're having a nightmare.
And this guy on the radio you hear in the beginning, who I think is a zombie. Though if he is a zombie, then that implies that a lot of the zombies are not entirely dead, you know? Just a thought. Anyway, the skeleton Vortigaunts can talk as well, just like in part 2. The dogs sound like dogs. Basically all the enemies sound the same. The new enemies, though, sound believable. The chicken head crabs sound like chickens, and the bulls that charge at you sound like bulls. The what I assume are baby skeleton Vortigaunts sound just like the normal skeleton Vortigaunts, except they have a higher pitch. As far as music goes, there is no background music, only ambience. But the only ambience that I remember are the crickets you hear when you're outside and the whooshing air when you're inside, so it's extremely bland. But that blandness, I think, perfectly signifies the lonely aspect of this mod.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The mod still retains its personality, but the gameplay lacks, albeit rarely in some sections. As for being more action than horror, it isn't a bad direction, but might be for Abel who wanted more spooks rather than gunfights. And there you have it. That concludes my 3-part review on They Hunger. This was supposed to come out last year, but one thing led to another. I missed Halloween again this year, and here we are. Anyway, all's well that ends well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and a big thanks to these members for supporting the channel: Klaus, Tboy301, HL1+1, TRR Droid, The Hazardous Memer, Bipolit the Fighter, Forgotten, and Skyclad. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.